The great Bob Costas from NBC and MLB Network joins us right now. Bob, how you doing? It's Michael, Don, and Peter.
Hey, guys. Michael, I'm only doing this, no disrespect to Don and Peter, because it's you and because of your Fordham connection to Vin, because I'm wondering what I can say about Vin Scully, great as he is and remarkable as his career has been, that I haven't said already. And I think it's a tribute to him that so many people, not just in sports, but many people outside of sports over the course of this season have seen fit to talk and to write about him and to try and place not just his talent, which is evident. If he had retired when he was 40 years old, you could have made a case for him as the greatest baseball announcer ever. By that time, he'd already called Sandy Koufax's perfect game and countless other memorable moments in exquisite fashion. But when you combine it with the longevity and the eras of baseball and the changes in the country that it spans and the way he manages to stitch it all together, the richness of that fabric, of that tapestry of his career and what it represents in baseball and really to a certain extent what it represents to the country is something that can never be matched. If a 22-year-old Vin Scully walks through the door today, he's still a remarkably talented announcer. He winds up with some team or on a network, and he winds up in the broadcaster's wing of the Hall of Fame. But the impact and the resonance would not be quite the same because the circumstances that surround his career are as remarkable as the broadcaster himself.
And that's the thing that saddens me. I've met Vin Scully 4 or 5 times. We've had him on the show. He's always a lovely gentleman. You had the opportunity to work with him, Game of the Week at NBC. And I'm saddened by the fact that I don't think it could happen. I don't even know if a guy with that sort of style would get to be a major league broadcaster anymore. No one would get hired at 22. And I just don't. And in order for Vin Scully, Bob, to be Vin Scully, I don't know if you agree, he does have to work alone. I don't think there's any executive that would allow anybody to do games alone anymore.
Well, that's true. Although when he started, even if he had a booth mate, let's say in Red Barber or Connie Desmond, it was common practice for each broadcaster to do several innings by himself, more or less. You might occasionally hear the other person chime in, but these were Red's innings, these were Vin's innings. That's the way it was when Kerry Doggett was in the radio booth with Vin as well. That's the way it was in the early days of baseball broadcasting, and now in that respect, Vin is the last man standing. But something else that I think escapes a lot of people who really aren't students of broadcasting, when you watch the games, and now Vin only does the first couple of innings as a simulcast on radio, so most of the broadcast is on television. It isn't just that he's working alone. It's that the entire broadcast recognizes that fact. He isn't following the truck. The truck is following him. There's no clutter on these broadcasts. There are no extraneous graphics. There's no pitch sequences. Somehow he's able to do a game without StatCast or exit velocity. The only replays you see are of genuinely spectacular plays or consequentially close plays. And if he's in the middle of a story and somebody gets a base hit to left, they're not going to replay that. Then he'll just tuck that in and keep on going. I remember a couple of years ago when Don Zimmer passed away, and Vin did a typically wonderful remembrance of Don that lasted the entire half inning. And during the course of that half inning, Scott Van Slyke got hit on the hip by a pitch. He wasn't beaned. The benches didn't empty, so it wasn't that important. He went down to first base. 100% of all other telecasts, no matter how good the broadcaster, no matter how good the producer, no matter how good the director, just reflexively, they would have replayed Scott Van Slyke being hit by a pitch, something that baseball fans have seen 100 times, but not the Dodger truck, because that would interrupt the flow of Vin's story. So not only is he a great artist, but he has made sure that he has the canvas, and he's deserved it, he's earned it, the canvas on which to do his best work. So the situation you propose, along comes a 22-year-old Vin Scully. Maybe they don't know what to do with him. Same thing as they wouldn't know what to do with Jack Whitaker or Haywood Hale Bruin or maximize the best of Jim McKay. They might be able to make it, but not to the same extent. But would they ever alter the entire tone, the entire pace of a broadcast to accommodate a broadcaster, no matter how great? I don't think so.
And you know the shame, Bob, when you look at this generation of announcers, and I think right now when you look at Joe Buck's resume between Super Bowls, and he's going to call his 21st World Series this year. But what's the talk about Joe Buck? Oh, he hates my team. I hate when Joe Buck calls a game because he's obviously a Yankee fan, or he obviously hates the Yankee fan.
Yeah.
So when you talk about pure love of a national announcer because of social media, because of access to be able to give your opinion, you just wonder if everybody could be beloved because you get so wrapped up in, is he calling it fair? Or I don't like Joe Morgan because he hates the Yankees, or I don't like this guy because he's a homer. It's just really, I think the way we view and listen to these announcers have completely changed.
That's another great point. And I hope people understand what I mean when I say this, because I take a backseat to no one in my admiration and appreciation of Vin Scully. And I was very honored that the Dodgers asked me to narrate the video of his career that preceded the ceremony this past Friday at Dodger Stadium. But if Vin Scully swapped places with Joe Buck, if Vin Scully was 45 years old and he's doing the World Series every year, there would be negative comments about him on social media. If Jim McKay was hosting the Olympics today, there'd be all sorts of stupid, ad hominem, insulting things said and written about Jim McKay, because that's the way the world is. Most of those comments would have no validity. Nobody's perfect, and there's always a legitimate critique, even of the greatest of the great. But that would comprise 1 or 2%. Most of it would just be nonsense coming from dummies. But nobody would be exempt from it, just as nobody, no matter how good they are, is exempt from it today, except that Vin was already, and I say this in the nicest possible way, he was grandfathered in.
Right.
He's the lone exception.
Now, it's interesting to me because first time I met him must have been about 5 or 6 years ago. Nobody, I'm a nobody, but obviously I'm from Fordham, and that means a lot to him, and he couldn't have been sweeter to me. I'm just wondering, Bob, you were very young when you broke onto the scene with NBC, and I guess Vin was about 50, something like that. How did he treat you?
He treated me well. We were not close friends, but we were friendly acquaintances. And I remember the first time I met him, he was actually doing radio of the World Series in 1982, the Brewers and the Cardinals. And I was 30 years old, and I looked like I was about 15. And luckily, the first World Series I was part of was for my adopted home team, the Cardinals. And Dick Enberg was doing the series with Tony Kubek and Joe Garagiola, and I was hosting the pregame. And I'm standing in position waiting to come on air, and Vin comes walking across my path. And I wanted to be as polite as you wanted to be the first time you met him, and as respectful. And I think I can remember almost verbatim what I said. I said, "Vin, excuse me, my name is Bob Costas." And he said, "Oh, of course, Bob. I know. You're doing very well." And, of course, that makes you feel, in my case, 6 feet tall, and that's quite a jump.
Yeah.
And I said, "I know you've heard this before, but all I can tell you is what an inspiration you've been to me as a broadcaster, and what a joy it is to listen to you even were I not a broadcaster." And he said, and it sounds so quaint, he said, "Bob, what a dear thing for you to say. What a dear thing for you to say." That's how that conversation went.
Well, what in particular did you learn from him from getting to work with him?
Well, I think I learned from him the same thing that he learned from Red Barber, the importance of preparation. I don't think it's a good idea to copy somebody, because then you just sound like a pale imitation. But you can learn something about the proper approach, about the importance of storytelling, about when to begin a story and when not to begin a story. But then again, as Michael mentioned, the circumstances of broadcasts are different now. So when I'm doing the game on the MLB Network, I'm working with terrific people. Jim Todd, John Smoltz, Tom Verducci, the producers and directors are terrific, but they've got commercial responsibilities. All the drop-ins, all the replay things that are sponsored. And so you got to be careful. Even if you have a good story to tell and you think you can tell it well, you have to say, do I have enough time to do this justice, or is it going to be truncated in some way or interrupted by a replay? So sometimes you don't even try. You say, you couldn't do it as well as Vin anyway, but sometimes you say to yourself, if I could do this 80% as well as Vin Scully, would I still have the time to do it? Or will the circumstances allow it? And the chances are it wouldn't.
Yeah, it's funny, Bob, because, you know, my boss is John Filippelli, and one of his rules is don't tell stories with 2 outs. And when the Dodgers were just in town, Rick Monday told me, he said, Vin Scully could start to tell a story with 2 outs and 2 strikes, and the guy will foul the pitch off 15 times just so the story gets in.
It's true. Somehow the game waits for Vin.
And it should.
You know, no one ever lines into a double play to end an inning when Vin is in the middle of a good story.
I have devoured so many of these stories about Vin, and one thing that jumped out at me is the advice that Red Barber gave him when he comes out of Fordham FUV and goes into the Dodger booth. And the 3 things that he told him, I just don't think that you could get a job now. He told him, don't listen to other broadcasters. And I hear what you're saying. You don't copy them, but people listen to other broadcasters.
Of course.
Don't give your opinion, and don't be a homer. There are some networks that hire you that if you do local baseball, you better be a homer, and especially in Chicago. And, I mean, don't give your opinion. I mean, the broadcast industry is so different than when Vince broke in 1950.
No question. Although Vin never refers to the Dodgers as we or openly root, it's obvious that he responds to the crowd and what's going on around him, so there's more excitement in his voice, especially in a home game, which is all he broadcasts now, essentially his home games for the last many years. So you can tell that he's more excited if the Dodgers do well, but it's always in a professional way, an elegant way, a less bombastic way than other people do.